I'm going to predict a Banefire here.
What? How can you call that blind? Amazing.
We did catch a glimpse of this earlier. You see a Satyr Enchanter, the combo Gifts of Paradise, but Banefire, unless you're Zvi Moshowitz taking a Leonin Bola, you are going to take the red Expel first pack here.
I always find it fascinating to the way people will manipulate a booster pack and figure out what they're going to take. Alex likes to put the card to the back of the booster pack. Yeah. I normally put it to the front of the booster pack. So one thing that Tom Gwevin taught me is to sort the cards by color, and that way you can kind of figure out what kind of signals you're sending to the left, what kind of cards are going to be open. You can do that especially in which the first pick is especially clear, because you don't have to waste any of your mental energy or your draft pick time to make the decision. It's an easy first pick Banefire.
Is it fair to say that Banefire is a quote-unquote colorless card in this draft format? Like that you're going to this is going to get played almost no matter what, unless Alex somehow ends up in 3 completely different colors?
Yes. I mean, certainly in white-blue, exactly white-blue has a trouble splashing, because you want to be aggressive. You don't necessarily have access to any of the fixing, and you're going to really need stuff like Stone Quarry, basically, or Highland Lake in order to splash Banefire. But realistically, you're going to do everything you can to find a way to put it in your deck.
All right, we see Viashino Pyromancer. This
is a close pick. There's Lightning Mare and there's Knightly Valor that stand out to me as being the best 2 cards in the booster. Knightly Valor is a card that I prefer to Lightning Mare.
How about a Leonin Vanguard?
That's a really surprising
and this time picking from the middle of the pack. So Alex Sittner certainly going to be the bane of our existence here, as he just picks cards from wherever they are in the pack and not giving us any kind of indication of what his thinking is by how he sorts them.
So it's difficult, obviously, this early in the format to figure out exactly what players are thinking, but obviously Knightly Valor, a card that I think is quite good. Alex values a lot less and really likes those really low to the ground Boros type of decks.
So Sure Strike and Mighty Leap, Onaki Ogre, Volley Veteran, a card that's really good in those red-white decks. Any guesses here?
Yeah, so Volley Veteran, not that much worse than the Horizon Scholar. So I would imagine, given the way that he would really like to be red as a main color for that Banefire, makes sense to take the Volley Veteran here. It's a little worse than Horizon Scholar, just on basic power level, but the pick I would make as well. Fill the sky with stuff.
Oh, there's a Shock, a Dragon's Egg.
That's good, clean living.
Locks in Linebreaker. And Shock, pretty easy pick here. There's also an Explosive Apparatus.
All anyone wants in life is for the best card in the booster to be in the color that you really want to be, right? And Shock here, the best card in this booster, and it happens to be in the color that Alex would love to be in terms of Banefire. So
yeah, there you go.
Nice start.
3 removal spells so far. The Volley Veteran, the Shock, and the Banefire.
And no commitment to white. Leonin Vanguard, a card that Alex obviously likes quite a bit, but definitely doesn't lock him into white by any stretch.
So Hostile Minotaur in red, Colossal Dreadmaw, a Totally Lost, Anticipate Bog Stomper, Knight of the Tusk, the only card in white for him.
Colossal Dreadmaw and Nightmare's Thirst, the best cards in the booster. I don't know.
Nightmare's Thirst.
I don't know if they're enough better than the Hostile Minotaur that I wouldn't just stay on track here. You can take the Hostile Minotaur to this pack. You completely are cutting red off to the left, right? You're not past. You haven't really passed any playable red cards to the person on your left, and so he's going to sacrifice a little bit of individual, independent card equity in favor of draft dynamics, saying, I want to make sure that I'm declaring to this table I am the red drafter.
Oh, there's a Goblin Instigator. Excellent card in these red-white decks.
Best card in the pack, happens to be in his colors. That's exactly what you want.
And, not a card that looks great on its face. Even though it's a 2-for-1, it's 2 1/1s. But when you're going to fill your deck with Inspiring Charges and Trumpet Blasts, ideally, and then also be able to just finish your opponent off with a Banefire. You only got to get them to 5, right?
And if you end up in red-black, it also has different different types of synergies in the red-black deck as well. So even if he actually abandons white, it still can end up being quite good.
Gutter Snipe, Onaki Ogre, Crash Through.
I quite like the Onaki Ogre. I got to be honest with you. Something that can hit that hard. You combine that thing with things like Mighty Leap or removal spells. I mean, 4 damage, 4/2 for 3. That's a great sizing.
I love a gutter snipe, and
Okay.
and so does Alex Sittner. Although I might like a gutter snipe more in a league than I do with my top 8 on the line.
Sure. Yeah, gutter snipe is okay. Yeah, I like the Chris Manning test to reference a player from back in the day. Chris Manning always said, consider the value of a card if you just draw it on turn 7. And drawing a gutter snipe on turn 7 is usually pretty ugly. So it's going to look pretty brilliant if he plays it on turn 3 and just starts shocking things.
And if you're in red white, not something that has a lot of card selection. There's a lightning mare that goes for Alex Sittner. So kind of mono red at this point.
Definitely. He'd love to just take red cards until the end of the draft.
Crash through it is. Crash through Inspired Charge. Another hostile Minotaur.
Inspired Charge is the best of the three, kind of
Yeah, that's what he takes.
of the Trumpet Blast, make a stand type of cards. So
that extra point of toughness that it gives is
so
backbreaking.
valuable, yeah. So he's going to take that. You're not sacrificing too much by giving up a second hostile Minotaur or Crash Through.
He's going to invest in Cinder Barons here.
That's what I like that pick a lot.
Just speculating on land.
And that's a great time to take these dual lands when you're not really sacrificing anything for your deck, but if you do end up in black, you'll be quite happy.
There's an Anaki Ogre for you. You could also go old school to the air with a Mighty Leap.
Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned before, when I draft these red-white decks, I like less of the Mighty Leap and Sure Strike type of effect. I want cards that are going to buff all my creatures or removal spells. So
Linebreaker, Fire Elemental. He's had multiple cards to choose from. Nothing spectacular, but has had multiple cards to choose from every pack along the way.
And he takes the Linebreaker over the Fire Elemental. I think a nice, disciplined pick. He hopes to not play the Linebreaker, obviously. He's a poor man's Onaki Ogre, right? But
he's really cutting red. He just took a mountain.
Did he really?
Yeah,
Okay.
over Naturalize and Bog Stomper.
That's kind of an advanced maneuver, Naturalize the kind of card that could end up being effective against him. But what he's saying is, to the person to your left, you can take the green cards, just take the green cards. Take all the green cards, but pass me what I want from my deck.
So here we get a look at the deck. By the way, that Goblin Instigator, great with Volley Veteran.
Mm-hmm. And great with the Onin Vanguard. And great with Inspired Charge. It's just so great with everything that you're doing in this deck. And
what's the upper limit of Goblin Instigators that Alex would want to see in a deck like this?
I think that you wouldn't want to play more than 6. I mean, there are decks that would play more than 6, but no, it's probably the best common 2-drop that you could have for the deck.
And specifically this red-white deck, not any of the other necessarily red decks.
Exactly. Red-green ones would much prefer Druid of the Cowl to Goblin Instigator on turn 2. That's the beauty of Magic, right? The differing card valuations depending on situation, archetype, and circumstance.
Great pack 1 there for Alex Sittner. I think in an excellent position here as we head into the second pack.
You always ask, what do you hope to open? I hope to open Heroic Reinforcements, and then I can just kind of filter the red and white cards to the front of the booster for the rest of the draft and not consider anything else. You don't want to open, something like Nicol Bolas here. You know what I mean? That starts to tempt you in sorts of directions that could be pretty ugly.
That would be a very disciplined pick, as you like to say, if he could take Heroic Reinforcements over. If you could pass a Nicol Bolas for any card.
Right.
You see the players waiting for everybody to get their count up. They look at Nicol Bolas the Ravager, Ravaging Limited, Ravaging Standard these days.
As far as anyone knows, the oldest Planeswalker in existence, Nicol Bolas the Arisen. That's just as far as we know.
Yeah. I heard that story from one of the greatest thieves in the multiverse.
How much do we know about Planeswalkers in the multiverse? I mean, we're just scratching the surface.
I mean, there's no possible way there could be one older, right? It's just impossible.
We have a lot of information about Planeswalkers.
Exile all but the bottom card of target player's library. I've never gotten to that point with Nicol Bolas the Arisen. My opponents have just always conceded.
Nope.
Volley Veteran, Shock. Which do you take between Volley Veteran and Shock if you are Alex Sittner here, Paul?
Shock has a higher floor. Volley Veteran has a higher ceiling. I think given that he already has things like Goblin Instigator and another Volley Veteran, he'll be strongly tempted to take the Volley Veteran. But Shock is a very defensible pick. taking Volley Veteran here does put you in some uncomfortable situations where you may need to take Goblins over higher power level cards, but Flame Tongue Kavu, pretty attractive as an ability. So I cannot fault Alex at all for taking the Volley Veteran.
And you're pretty happy just getting to deal 2 with this to a creature, right? That's just going to be terrific. So, you don't need a ton of Goblins.
If your 4-mana 4/2 does almost anything when it comes into the battlefield, you're getting a good card.
We watch Skeleton Archers be, backbreaking at times. So there's a Bogart Brute. It's another Goblin for the Goblin army. See a hostile Minotaur.
And, see a Brawl Bash Ogre and a Dried Green Seeker here. So
there's a Brawl Bash, hanging out in the back.
The Dried Green Seeker, obviously not a card that Alex is likely to take. He's probably just going to take the Bogart Brute. But a little scary that you're getting past a pack with Dried Green Seeker and a Rabid Bite and still the rare there as well.
Right, after you went through all that effort to pass a Naturalize.
Yeah.
Does take the Bogart Brute, though.
So you're hoping that the person to your left is in black-blue right now. Feasible.
Worth noting that if someone had opened something like a Nicol Bolas, you would be aware of it because it's a double-face card. Everyone at the table would get to see it. We don't have any information about that. So Strangling Spores, we know those go around the table quite late. I got to tell you, there's not that much. Oh, there's a Knightly Valor.
I'm interested to see if he takes the Knightly Valor or values the Rustwing Falcon higher. I like Knightly Valor, and I'm the guy who's always advocating for taking the cheaper card. I just think this is such a high power level card. I think that when you stick it, and they don't have removal spell immediately, you all of a sudden you're getting just such a massive threat on the table.
And again, even if they use a Disperse on it, once it's resolved, you don't have to cast it into open mana.
Mm-hmm.
You still get something out of it. You get your creature back. It's probably one of the better auras to put yourself at some kind of jeopardy with.
And it fits very nicely into the plan of going wide.
All right, here's another Lightning Mare. An Act of Treason, and boy, red and white has not looked wide open here. I would guess that there's someone near him who's in maybe not that archetype exactly, but a red player and a white player right near him.
A Lich's Caress, a Satyr Enchanter, and a Druid of the Cowl, so green and black cards starting to flow. I think that at this point there's not much you can do. You take the Lightning Mare. We know that we're going to be red. He may choose to play white. His deck may end up being one of those 16 mountain type of decks when it's all said and done.
I'd like to see a couple Crash Throughs end up in his pile if he's going to do that. Well, there is the Goblin Instigator that we've been talking about. Just makes both of his Volley Veterans so much better. Makes his Inspiring Charge so much better. The Heroic Reinforcements that you've undoubtedly locked into existence by talking about it.
With 2 Volley Veterans, a Goblin Instigator is just such a high value pickup at this point. And with each passing pick, we grow more and more likely that Alex will not choose to add a second color to his red deck.
Okay, Viashino Pyromancer, Trumpet Blast, and Havoc Devils. Now, if he goes mono red, he no longer has access to his, his pump spell, which pumps his team. He's thinking about that Trumpet Blast now.
If mono red, Viashino Pyromancer and Trumpet Blast fairly close in level, I think Viashino Pyromancer slightly better. If red white, he would prefer the Trumpet Blast, but I like the pick of Pyromancer there to keep his options open for being just mono red.
And that's what he took. There's Tormenting Voice, only real card in the pack for him.
Tormenting Voice is the kind of card that when you end up submitting a mono red deck, you end up playing Tormenting Voice quite frequently. Seems like Alex does not want to submit a mono red deck.
Yeah,
if
he
possible.
just took a Dwarven Priest here, yeah. Another Viashino Pyromancer, though.
Now, if you were more of an even red and white deck, I prefer the Runewing Falcon to the Viashino Pyromancer just because it's 1 drop and 2 toughness and a lot of things to recommend it. But it's trending towards the deck, as we mentioned before, from mana purposes. Alex is going to be a max 7 planes kind of deck, so you just can't play a card like Runewing Falcon.
All right, does take the Pyromancer. Well, there's a Sure Strike. Do you like that better if you're mono red?
Exactly, yeah. Sure Strike much more valuable in mono red. where you're going to use it to pump up a Havoc Devils or something of that nature.
Or again, a Bogart Brute, which your opponent is kind of, if they want to block it, they have to put 2 creatures in front of it.
Yes, obligated. But Sure Strike in an aggressive deck, never a card you're embarrassed to
there's
include.
There's a Brawl Bash Ogre.
I would take it.
And a Hostile Minotaur.
Yeah, I think that Brawl Bash Ogre is just, if you end up, he has that Cinder Barons, maybe you open some black rare in pack 3. How many Hostile Minotaurs you're really going to play, so. Is that an active treason? Oh.
It is an active treason, a Catalyst Elemental, Tectonic Rift. Tectonic Rift, by the way, in the winning draft list from last weekend in Chiba.
Interesting.
That was the deck, a deck that won the draft red-white and had one Tectonic Rift main deck.
Active Treason and Tectonic Rift play in sort of the same sandbox in terms of functionality. They're both those let me finish you off reach type of cards. I slightly prefer Active Treason. He had potentially some open synergies with that Brawl Bash Ogre he just took if he dips into black. I also just like Active Treason more as a card, but Tectonic Rift totally fine as well.
All right, Fire Elemental did come back around the table to him.
And this, we see the evolution of the format. Last week we saw Steve Rubin taking Fire Elemental over some 2 and 3 drops. That was very surprising to me. Nothing against Steve Rubin. The format's just so fresh, that you just don't know necessarily the pick orders. Now, people's pick orders are being refined a little bit. People realizing that you don't necessarily need those Fire Elementals in your Boros deck. This is the kind of style that you want to be.
Also with limited experience leading into it, you can have a different sense of the speed of the format in the early weeks. And as you sort of see how the wide world approaches the format, you get a much better sense of it.
And really, you look, he's got very minimal white that he wants to play. The Knightly Valor, possibly Leonin Vanguard, possible Spire Charge, possible Dwarven Priest, but nothing that knocks your socks off from a white perspective. But, he made a few picks, like taking Brawl Bash Ogre over Hostile Minotaur, like taking Dwarven Priest over Tormenting Voice. Those are the sorts of picks that end up precluding you from being mono-red, because you end up with not enough red cards to fill out an entire strategy.
He does have Tectonic Rift sort of in that cut of playable cards. Not in the back with Fire Elemental and Smelt. So
he has 16 cards if you were just going to be red right now. If you make those 2 picks the other way, then you have 18. You feel very confident in getting to 24 playables to play mono red. At 16, it's borderline.
It's got a little bit of mana fixing. Remember for that ogre.
Mm-hmm.
Again, suddenly also maybe turns. We talked about that Active Treason versus Tectonic Rift, but maybe you can get an Active Treason later around the table.
And there's no thought of splashing the ogre. He won't be playing red white with a little bit of touch of black, but he may. But if he ends up being mono red and abandoning white, then obviously the fixing allows you to just touch black as opposed to having to play 8 swamps or something like that.
So maybe 3 black sources.
Something like 3 or 4 swamps plus the Cinder Barons.
All right. Players waiting for everybody as we go into this third pack. So what are we looking for? Are we still looking for heroic reinforcements here?
Heroic reinforcements, any red rare, another Banefire would do nicely. Demanding Dragon, Lathless, something of that nature.
Oh, Lathless would be very nice.
Wants to continue to make sure that he's keeping his Goblin count nice and high for those 2 copies of Volley Veterans. So, additional Goblin Instigators, certainly perfectly a fine fit for his deck.
Bogart Brute, a card we saw first packed this weekend, and looks pretty good in his deck, I think.
Yeah, in the Pantheon, we always joke about a card being someone's mythic. So when you take a common or an uncommon that no one else really thinks of the same way, and you keep first picking it, we say, oh, that's Shahar's mythic, or oh, that's Ben Rubin's mythic.
What's your mythic?
Well, I've had a lot of mythics over the course of my day because I tend to have idiosyncratic pick orders, if you will.
I think probably the downfall of my limited career is that I indeed will.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of different ways you can play limited. You can, there's also, you can go to the store and draft and say, I'm going to build a deck that I have fun with, right? Like, we're talking about right now people trying to get an opportunity to win $10,000, and those picks can be very different than the picks you make at the store level where you're trying to have, a big weekend. Liliana's Contract, Fell Spectre, Diamond Mare, pretty nice in a mono red deck.
It's okay in terms of being able to gain life. His deck wants to be more on the aggressive side, so I honestly, I'm looking at the Liliana's Contract and think that's pretty tempting here at this point.
Havoc Devil's one of the more unexciting first picks you would have seen
pretty unexciting,
in this format.
But he's done a good work on kind of keeping his curve low. It does combo nicely with Sure Strike.
And he does take the Rustwing Falcon there.
Okay, so that's indicates to me that he wants to be more of like a 8/8 kind of mana base. So he's going to play all of these white 1-drops.
He wants to let Magic Online suggest his mana base
yes.
for him. So there's an Anaki Ogre. Wow. Oh, there's a Gallant Cavalry. That card looks really nice in this deck if we're going red-white.
Gallant Cavalry fits really nicely. It's at this point the ship has kind of sailed, I think, on maybe going into black. So even the Lich's Caress.
Oh, yeah, there is that Lich's Caress hanging out with the two-headed zombie.
I think the Gallant Cavalry is too good. Now that he has clearly established himself as being both red and white.
Yeah, Gallant Cavalry, easy pick here. Again, we talked about, comparing it to Call of the Cavalry in the last set. And this is just better.
Much better. Yeah, much better in a few ways.
Although not in red-white, it might as well just be Call of the Cavalry.
True. In red-white, it might as well just be called the Cavalry, but there are more rewards for it.
So there's a Pegasus Courser. There's there's a Trumpet Blast. There's a Make a Stand. Oh, we see some green and blue cards. There's a Reassembling Skeleton he has no interest in. Pegasus Courser easy here, or do you think about one of the cards that really favor the go-wide strategy?
You'll be tempted by Skyscanner and Trumpet Blast. I think ultimately he'll end up taking the Pegasus Courser. This is not as good of a Pegasus Courser as we saw earlier. Oh, wow.
This is the second time we've seen Make a Stand be the pick in a situation like this.
Okay. Alex has a lot of decks with a lot of creatures with higher power than toughness, so the Anaki Ogre, Bogger Brute, Volley Veteran part of his deck, and those decks do kind of like those creatures do like the indestructibility clause of Make a Stand. So defensible pick, a little bit surprising. I was going to note that his deck is a weaker Pegasus Courser deck than, for example, Kentaro Yamamoto's that we saw earlier. Alex doesn't have a lot of those 2-mana high-power creatures that he wants to send to the air, but he does have things like Volley Veteran. So a little surprising that he doesn't value the Pegasus Courser in his strategy, but certainly a defensible pick.
Goblin Instigator says, hey, guys, get this Plague Mare out of this draft pod. We do not want to see this card. Plague Mare, a very good card against Alex Sittner, and nothing spectacular in the pack for him, and he just takes it. And boy, look at this, another Lich's Caress going around the table. Black was clearly the color to be in at this table.
Yeah, 2 Lightning Mares and 2 Goblin Instigators for Alex Sittner. So important defensive draft there. We talked about
and
cards.
Two Viashino Pyromancers.
Wow, yeah. So just a card he can't beat.
So he takes a Diamond Mare.
Interesting. So that indicates to me that it's a card he intends to play, very likely. Because there were certainly better cards to defensively draft.
Wow, there's a late Bogart Brute for him.
That would get you kicked out of Kentaro Yamamoto's draft club if you pass a Bogart Brute this late.
Yeah, card we saw. First packed earlier in the day. That's his second Brute. Got a nice number of goblins.
Yes.
The Volley Veterans are going to really shine in this stack.
Yes. And don't forget, can't have better reach than Banefire. And we say reach, we mean, Alex's deck, very low to the ground, very high power level, but likely to peter out in the middle game as other opponents with more powerful 4, 5, 6 mana cards start taking control. Card like Banefire allows him to finish games like that.
I thought it meant he could aim the Banefire at a flyer and kill it, effectively blocking it for the rest of the game.
Yes. Or kill something with reach, like Giant Spider.
There's a Draconic Disciple. Nothing here. Divination. Oh, there's another Plague Mare. Get it out. Is he going to just go Plague Mare again here?
I would imagine. Yeah, it's again, as far as cards to defensively draft, it's hard to think of one more high value or more devastating for Alex's strategy than Plague Mare.
We listed, 8 cards?
When it passes, those who sleep dream of sickness and death. That's terrifying.
Well, there's a Havoc Devils. Everything black out of that pack came back around the table. This is crazy.
I just dropped my pen.
Yeah, you dropped your pen, your wrist, your cufflink popped off.
Liliana's Contract is a card that I like quite a bit.
You called it a borderline bomb.
It's a borderline bomb in some decks. If you're able to trade off 1 for 1, and you have an occasional incidental lifelink, draw life gain, draw 4 cards. 4?
Yeah, for 5 mana. And, you might win the game.
Yeah, I think we saw, I remember reading Luis Scott Vargas' preview articles for Channel Fireball, and he talked about Liliana's Contract, and he said, Liliana's Contract, quite a strong card. There are a lot of demons that you can get.
All right, sideboard smelt, and then we're just kind of winding down the pack here with Alex Sittner, who's drafted a pretty sweet-looking deck, counter-drafted some cards that are really good against his deck, and putting himself in a position to get the 3rd Grand Prix top 8 of his career.
And we've seen a lot of these experienced drafters do everything they can to get into this Boros aggressive strategy. I think that there's been like a little bit of a consensus almost that's starting to form that Boros aggressive deck might be the best deck in Core Set 2019 Booster Draft.
I feel like that's true of a lot of draft formats over recent years. There is, as you get into weeks 2 and 3 of the format, the aggro deck reveals itself, and people really start wanting to force it before it kind of crumbles under the weight of being overdrafted.
Well, this is the beginning of week 3, right, of the format. So weeks 1 and 2 we know are best format of all time. Beginning of week 3, we get the tempo-oriented. Week 4, of course, bomb-driven. And week 5, unplayable drivel. So luckily we're still in the tempo-oriented component, and the players are starting to try to draft those tempo-based decks.
What was how do you feel that deck went for him? Very well?
That deck is probably about a 6.5 or a 7. I think it's right on the borderline of is it that 2-1 or that 1-2 deck. So about a 50-50 chance that we see Alex Sittner in this top 8.
Banefire covers up a lot of holes. So we got a commercial for you, and then we will be back with more Magic as we make our way through these last rounds before we get to the top 8 of Grand Prix Minneapolis.